Hello, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live, everyone. I'm Adam Bloomberg, Senior Client Success Advisor here at IMS, where we help lawyers gain a competitive advantage in the courtroom. Today, Dr. Keith Pounds is here to discuss his recent article on how to approach juror anti-corporate frustration through trial strategy. And here's a little background on Keith. He brings nearly 20 years of litigation consulting experience to his role as a jury consulting advisor. He's a master at identifying and developing compelling case themes and presentation strategies. And he enjoys working with attorneys on complicated cases and finding ways to make the story resonate with the jury. The discussion will be led by our very own Chris Dominic, Senior Strategy and Jury Consulting Advisor. Chris, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Adam. Keith, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you, Chris?
Good. It's good to see you. I'm really curious about your most recent article that you authored on anti-corporate attitudes among today's juries. You and I both work side by side on a lot of matters, and I wonder, how are you seeing this all play out these days? What's this sentiment that, if you had to sort of summarize it, how would you describe it?
Yeah, the article was really prompted by the unfortunate murder of the United Healthcare CEO last year, Brian Thompson. And I think the thing that really kind of came to the fore was just not just the shocking nature of the assassination, but the public vitriol that followed in the response to that assassination. And I think it shocked a lot of people that there was so much anger out there. And, this is something that you and I see a lot in the mock trials and jury research that we do over the last few years. So we wanted to write something that really kind of peeled back the layers on some of the things that we're seeing in our jury research and what we've seen change since the pandemic in particular.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The change since the pandemic is notable to those of us that are doing focus groups and mock trials every day. I'm curious, are there any particular old playbooks that you see that just, for whatever reason, you can see them repeating themselves and you think to yourself, well, that might have worked in 2015, but not today?
Yeah, that's one of the things. So one of the big changes we're seeing nationwide in all kinds of venues, big and small, is a rise in this kind of anti-corporate sentiment among a large portion of the demographics. And so you have to factor that in when you go into your trial presentation. And one of the things that I know, if you are a corporation and you're a corporate defendant, that might typically be done would be sort of like almost like a corporate commercial at the beginning of a defense presentation. Say, hey, we're a good company. This is what we do. We have good employees. Now we'll talk about the case. And that's really that's fallen flat.
That's the nicest way you can put it, I think. It's sometimes it backfires, right? Have you seen it backfire?
I think it does backfire because, one of the things that, juries are looking for is, how are you not the sort of the worst case scenario that the plaintiff is putting out there? And if you're talking in broad general terms with, platitudes about yourself, you're just playing right into that playbook that the plaintiffs are suggesting, which is you're a large corporation, you're so big, you don't need to care about the specific plaintiff or the specific allegations that you're facing. It's pretty much the opposite, I think, of what counsel should be thinking about with regard to presenting their corporate client.
Right. You're not talking about the issues in the case. You're talking about your image, and it sounds to me like you're trying to manipulate me. It's that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, that's right. And people don't want to be talked down to, and they don't want to feel like they're just wolves being pulled over their eyes. They're looking for something a lot more realistic than that. And if you start off on that foot, you're already, I think, maybe a foot behind with your jury.
So Keith, if we separated this into the way we work with our clients, you and I, sometimes we're working specifically for the outside counsel. Sometimes we're working for the corporate counsel. If we started with outside counsel and said, all right, what can we do about it? Where would you start?
One of the things I might start with outside counsel is thinking about how they're going to portray their corporate defendant. And as opposed to kind of giving a company commercial, I think it's really effective if you lean right into the stereotypes about the industry that your company works within and acknowledging that to the jury and say, look, I know there's some concerns about, let's say, for example, privacy, and this is a technology case. And I get it, and you have reasons to be concerned, but let me tell you about how what this company did or what this app does is so different than the stereotype. Really kind of differentiating and acknowledging, the stereotypes that's out there and saying, hey, we're not that, and we're going to show that to you through the people you're going to meet and learning more about this case. First thing. The other thing is to really think with outside counsel is, the overall story of the case and what are the major thematic issues that you want to bring across to the jury, and what corporate representatives are going to be selected to really help bring that to life for your jury.
I like the priming reframing combo, Keith. That's very cool. Okay, so what about corporate counsel? What can they do about it?
Yeah, corporate counsel. It's interesting. Both you and I have company clients, and one of the things that I think we see is that they face not just that individual case that you're working on in that moment, but they've usually got a raft of other cases coming down the line that may be similar or slightly different, but have similar issues. And so one of the things that I think corporate counsel is good to think about is how can we come up with an overall strategy for defending these kinds of cases? What kinds of challenges do we see routinely? And how can we address them with trial preparation, with getting consultants involved earlier? Let's have a conversation before depositions are taken about the case, about potential issues, and think about who's going to be deposed and what they need to be prepared for.
Yeah, it's funny, when you and I were talking the last time we ran into each other in one of the many cities we run into each other for mock trials and focus groups, right? We were talking about the fact that one of the things that we can really influence corporate counsel on sometimes when we have a lot of experiences with them is we can remind them of what we don't need to do again because we know it doesn't work, or a direction that we want to go because we want to try it, and we could maybe run it through a focus group or something. And sometimes there's pushback because it's like, isn't this kind of early? But what would you say to that? Because at least in the conversation you and I had, we were both thinking, actually, that's the way you can guide discovery, right?
Yeah, I think it's time well spent early on, and it really, think about how the opportunity to sit down with you or myself or one of our colleagues who's maybe worked on hundreds of cases that are similar to the one we're dealing with here. Let's get in a room. Let's talk with outside counsel, inside corporate counsel, all the stakeholders. What do we think is going to be presented by the plaintiff? What are some of the real challenges here? And what have you seen as consultants that haven't worked? What has fallen flat in the past? And really kind of thinking about coming up with a strategy for who needs to be deposed, who needs to be prepared, and also what is the overall story in this case? How do we get our kind of arms around it, and can we make some good strategic decisions with how we allocate our resources and our time as we prep?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And how have you seen this apply from taking the strategy early on and then applying it to witness preparation in advance of depositions?
Yeah, and I think that's so important, thinking about witness preparation, particularly in the rise of this really broad anti-corporate sentiment. And you've got a company witness. I think we could pretty predictably, or not, at least have some pretty good idea of the kinds of traps that plaintiff counsel might like to throw in front of a potential corporate rep during a deposition. And so being ready for what those kinds of questions are, just depending on the segment of industry or the information that representative will need to be able to speak to, can be really helpful in preparing them for their deposition. But also, I think just as importantly, is really kind of being proactive with regard to the company and the things that are being defended. This is a product we really believe in. That's why we sell it. That's why we make it. Or if this is this is a technology that has really advanced so many things. And so let's talk about that, and let's make sure the witness is prepared to represent that in a way that helps carry the company story.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because I think sometimes in the most ideal situations, even early, we've got somebody from the visual advocacy team there with us, And they can sometimes help guide discovery by saying, the chart I'd love to be able to put together would be this one. We don't have that data yet necessarily, but can we go look for it? Or, let's try, right? I mean, I know you and I both done things like that. Can you think of anything like that you've used to maybe sharpen the saw before you go cut, if you will?
Yeah, it's so important to not just tell, but show. And, those visual advocates, they're so good and experienced at being able to come up with visual ways to carry a lot of the weight of explanation to a jury. And that can be really helpful both in how you're preparing our witnesses, but also communicating the message to the court, to the trial, to the jury as well. So, yeah, and they bring so much to the conversation because, one of the things, it could be a really simple concept that could be illustrated with a simple demonstrative, or it could be something a lot more complicated, like a tutorial. It's so, for so many defendants, there's a lot of information and a lot of explanation they typically need to do to the jury to make sure they're making a good informed decision. And really good demonstratives help do that so well and so effectively. So it's great to get them involved early on as well.
Absolutely. Well, Keith, I'm looking forward to the next time we run into each other on the road. And thanks for joining us today. And thanks to everybody who tuned in. It's all yours, Adam.
IMS has served trusted law firms and corporations worldwide for more than 30 years and over 65,000 cases. As a strategic partner for the full case lifecycle, our integrated teams provide specialized advisory support, expert witness services, litigation consulting, visual advocacy, and presentation technology to elevate strategies and protect hard-earned reputations. Learn more at imslegal.com.